Mamana inareo rauranga tira mātena koutou. Well, I don't know about the real deal. I'm quite overwhelmed by how many real deals I've already met since I walked into this room. You're all wonderful experts in your own ways and authorities in your own ways, and so I'm very grateful for the honour of being here this afternoon to represent our company. A couple of things just happened. I love synchronicity personally. As I was walking into the room, I thought something stuck on my foot, and I looked at it and said, "Hello, my name is Journey." So I thought, how terribly appropriate. There you go, there's your snicker back. Yeah, good message to be on my right foot. And the other thing was through having a conversation over here with these two wonderful women, they've been coaching me as I prepare my nerves for coming on. So what I teach is being taught to me, so that's just perfect. So as Anya said, my name's Tom McCrory. I'm the Associate Director of a company called the Conch. And I've got a series of slides, but I like to work in the moment as well about things that I'm hearing and develop the corridor that's being passed around here as well. Pathways to healthy relationships. The Conch is something well known. We heard the beautiful sound of the putatara this morning. In Fiji, it's called the davui. It's a way to make pathways to connections and hopefully some healthy relationships. But for me, it's important why we called our company the Conch, apart from our company being a Pacific-centered company, is that a pathway for us, the call that goes out, I feel just like the karanga that I heard this morning, is not a one-way street. A pathway is a two-way street. And if the pathway is about relationship, then that becomes essential. So when I stand here as a person who has the authority to talk about what I have to talk about, but I don't want to stand in front of you as an authority or as an expert at all. And I don't want to share what I have to say in that spirit. I want to share it because I want a pathway to be established through my voice and through my presence here today towards relationship. So the Conch was named for precisely that reason. So Nisam Bulavanaka is my next greeting, and that's from our artistic director Nina Nawalawalo, who is also my wife, I'm very fortunate to say. She is of New Zealand Fijian descent, and she is at the heart of our company as an artist. And here's a little bit of information. The Conch, we were founded in 2002, so 13 years ago. We're Pacific, primarily visually based theatre, so we make theatre which is telling stories through imagery, through movement. We tour nationally and internationally with our work. This is an example from one of our works called Vula, which toured for 7 years internationally. And the other strand to our work, which is what I'm going to focus on today, is called Conscious, which, me being a word playing person, is the part of our work which is not like a lot of companies devoted to education and outreach. Is this a term, I'm sorry if anybody uses it, which I don't particularly warm to. I think that branch of our work is about social change, because that's what I'm personally, emotionally, politically committed to. It's led by our artistic director, Nina Nawalawala, that's not her. By myself, Associate Director Tom McCrory. We've got a beautiful administrator called Clea Matthews. We've got two interns called Kasaya Manalevu and Lendua Tausilange, who are both Fijian women. We work with a Kaupapa Pacifica, which is Vakaviti, which is based on a set of values arising from Fijian culture. And we're a charitable trust, and our two heads of that are Pele Walker, who some of you might know, being head of the Pacific Committee for Create New Zealand, Teresi Atia Iwa, who is the head of the Pacific Studies Department at Victoria University. That is Nina Nawalawala. And I put her up there for a number of reasons, because I want you to see her, and she sends her apologies for not being here today. She's working with young people up in Auckland. She's an amazing woman, an amazing artist, my life partner. And so as well, when I tune my corridor today, pathways to healthy relationships, English person working with a Pacific person, man working with woman, husband working with wife. You know, we've been working together for 20 years. I nearly said excuse me, but excuse me. Yeah, we've been working together for nearly 20 years. And that pathway to a healthy working relationship is a lifelong commitment between us. and it's not easy, and it requires continual clearance of the pathway to make it healthy. But my God, is it worth it? It's really worth it from the point of view of learning. As a European male, I've had a phenomenal amount to learn over 20 years of working with Pacific and Māori people. And there's the two-way street again. I'm not going as an expert, I'm going as me meeting you. And we exchange. So Nina's a great artist in her own right. And her personal pathway in her own life, the pathway she's had to carve as a woman, as a Pacific woman, as an internationally successful theatre director, is an immense journey, journey in itself. Yeah? And here we go. Our current projects I'm going to introduce you to now because they're little stories in themselves. Marama is a Fijian word as well as a word in Te Reo. Marama means high-born woman in Fijian. But it's also, again, a play on words because it means clarity, among many other things. Moon as well. This is a project we're going to premiere at the Auckland Festival next year. I talk about it, why? Because it's talking about our focus in our work increasingly being driven by our desire to tell stories that are necessary now. I'm not interested in entertainment for entertainment's sake. We're interested in finding the voices that need to be heard and bringing those voices to the stage. So this is Suzanne Galutia from the Western Province of the Solomon Islands, who plays a leading role in our production. I'll tell you more about how we met later. It's about deforestation in the Pacific and the impact on the indigenous culture, which is huge, but it's not a voice that's really visible, which is not being heard, which is not main stage. So we're bringing the people from the places to the stage and putting it on an international platform so that that voice can be direct, unmediated, and have the power of its own authority, which to me is a very important theme in our work. The other work that we've been dealing with is working with... Am I going too fast? Are you all right? I'm just conscious of our man running out of time. The other work we've been doing recently is called The White Guitar. There's many stories involved in this. It's a family story, so 3 members of the same family, a father and his 2 sons, appearing on stage together, telling an intergenerational story that began in 1948 and goes through to the earthquake in Christchurch in 2011. It's a story which was fraught with all sorts of things, like many families are: violence, drug addiction, gang membership, you name it. But the story is one of redemption, and largely through the creative power of music, the finding of the voice, the finding of the authority of one's own voice. But the healing process took place within the making of the play. At the beginning of that play, the 3 men found it hard to be in the same room as each other. At the end of the play, the entire family across the whole of Aotearoa came together on a very important cultural and social and performance occasions to meet, to hear their story. And audiences across the country, 13 standing ovations on the trot, tells me that this resonates with all sorts of people too. You should be, and I hope you're hearing themes in what I'm saying already, and I hope they're resonating with you, because that's why I'm making this noise. Stages of change. For the last 2 years, Nina and I have had the privilege to be working in the Solomon Islands, setting up a national women's theatre company, the primary focus of which is not solving, not trying to promote awareness about, I wouldn't say at the heart of it, I'd say it's about exploring, inviting dialogue around the huge issue, not just there but everywhere, of violence against women and girls. Nina, being a Pacific woman, being a Melanesian woman, you can imagine the qualitative difference in that journey for people in that place, to being led by a woman of their own kind. They identified with her in that way. Often a lot of people who go in there to work with these aid-based projects look like me and hand out leaflets at the back of, 4-wheel drives that they go into villages with. Nina's focus was how do I create this resonance with the men? And Nina, being Nina as well, the way she chose to do it is through traditional culture. A lot of people from the outside might look at traditional culture in a negative sense and saying it's because of traditional culture, the bride price, the treating of women as property, that we have all of these issues. No, said Nina, the way to create relationship with the men is to remind them of the traditional role of their women, the layers of violence that have occurred and accrued, particularly during the last 150 years, are as a result of the disturbance of culture, of traditional culture. And so by reminding men in particular, but the whole community, of the power of their wahine, of their women, traditionally they were seeing their ancestors, they were seeing their mothers, they were seeing their grandmothers, and it becomes a question of, would you hurt this? Would you hurt this? Would you strike this? Would you abuse this? When it means so much more when you see a woman in those ways than in a t-shirt and a pair of shorts in the market. And the women themselves loved it. All of these things have grown together and informed this idea of conscious. And like I said, it's not about education and outreach, it's about social change. We all exist in an environment where we have to be funded, we have to prove outcomes, we have to statistically enumerate all these things that we've achieved. But for me, at the heart of me, as an artist, as a practitioner, as a human being, is the desire for social change. I'm a political person, and I think that in the essence of what theatre is about, it's about humanity. Theatre is a shared space like the marae. There should be no door policy that excludes anybody. The material we engage with each other is about trying to find a shared healthy relationship of a pathway of our common humanity. And that's not to negate difference, but it's to see through difference rather than difference be a boundary to my vision, is what I'm interested in. And I've experienced this time and time again through our work of what another person is. And it's shocking for people when that happens. And that little shock, I think, for myself, is consciousness waking up and barriers beginning to break down. And that sounds maybe like a romantic idea. I'm sorry if it does. It's not a romantic idea. Working in the Solomons is not a romantic idea. It's the 5th most aid-based dependent country in the world. It's recently coming out of a civil war. When we arrived there were still peacekeeping troops on the ground. Violence explodes in a moment. It's not a romantic idea for me. So I believe that theatre is a force for social change. Even on the basis, you could say, if you walk in to see a play, you shouldn't walk out the same human being that you walked in. The key to me is, what is the change that happens? What does the change serve? Is it that I walk out a little bit happier? Well, that could be good. Well, I feel more connected with my emotions. That's good. But I think the true power lies in the ability to promote change, because that's the creative process. I would say that one thing you're all in this room is creative people. You have to be, right? Because you're constantly in the process of having to make change, and you're constantly in the process of having to make choices, right? You're faced with something in one state, yeah, and you have to find a way to transform that thing into another state. Whether you look at that as social attitudes, or you look at that as a person in a situation, you have to find creative solutions, don't you? For me, I want everything I do to be driven by necessity. And that might seem like an obvious idea, but it's not, eh? So many of the things that happen around us are not driven by necessity. If they were driven by necessity, there wouldn't be the number of social issues that there are. If we focus social policy on necessity, it would be a very different world that we live in. If we based our process around what's happening with climate and made that the basis of our social policies, we would not be existing in the same place. Necessity is often ignored because only certain people experience want. Only certain people experience necessity. It's not a universal thing. It's not a universal thing for me. We live inside a system where certain people oppress other people, where certain people's needs are prioritized over other people's needs. So if I'm going to make anything, if I'm going to do anything with my own work, it has to be driven by necessary, by the word necessary. And that to me as a storyteller is what is the story that needs to be told. Needs to be told. Not what do I want to do as an artist, what do I want to paint, no. What story needs to be told. That doesn't mean it's my story. But through approaching somebody whose story needs to be told, I have to come into a relationship. I have to build a pathway between my position, their position. Even to go, hey, I believe your story needs to be told. Do you know what I mean? You go, well, you might go, who the F are you to tell my story, mate? No, you tell your story. But how can I use my skill to enable you to tell your story? Or to encourage you to tell your story? Or however you want to describe it. Am I going too fast, too slow? How are you going? Cool. For me, this all boils down to how we define ourselves. Auto comes from the word for the self. Telling a story is about authorship. Authorship. Having authorship. Having the right to tell your story. Having the right to have your story heard, whether it be a child's right, you know. Having a right to tell it. You know, people are denied the right to tell their story for their knowledge to be included. So, authorship is a big one. What story can we tell? Mostly, I think, our own. Authenticity is something I'm interested in that also connects to this word. It has to be real. It has to be something... what do I mean by real? It has to be something which reflects a reality within the society that we live in. It has to feel real. It cannot be fantastical. Though we use a lot of magic in our work. Authority, something I struggled with all my life and was brought up to struggle with all my life. I was brought up by communists. My parents were both members of the Communist Party. My grandparents were both founder members of the Communist Party in the UK and Glasgow. And so authority is something I've struggled to come into to a healthy relationship with. But that's good. But I think as I've grown older and I've grown up a bit, I've developed a healthier relationship with that word. Because to me it's about being endowed with the power to have the authorship to tell my authentic story. I need to experience my own authority over myself in relationship in order to come into relationship. Wherever there's an unequal authority, there is and can be no relationship, I think. I don't know if this is helping with your Wānanga, but I hope so. Theatre is all about harnessing the power of relationships. Yeah, even the word composition, like a composer, means com, together, position, placed together in relationship. Nothing about theatre is about one thing. It's all about the relationship between things. Hamlet's not about Hamlet, it's about all the characters of Hamlet. And the space between them, right? So the placing of things in relationship is a choice. And again, you have to come back to why you make a choice to place one thing in relationship to another. And I say that because I think it runs across the board of everything that we do within our work. It's taking the time to realise that moment of choice fully. Why am I placing this in relationship to that in this way? Because therein lies the creativity, which is all about making choices, isn't it? What you place in the frame, what you give focus to, what you make visible, what you conceal. So that's all about relationship for me too, is the theatre. Theatre's the audience. But the big thing is, how do I harness the power of those relationships? For me, harnessing the power of relationship means, how do I use what I've got to the maximum impact? Here's a range of the things we're currently doing and why we use this word conscious, because conscious is not something I have and I want to instill in you. You know, conscious is a field of activity between people. And again, this pathway is not a one-way street. Just like the porphyry this morning doesn't go, we're this and you're that and you're coming to us. It's about the weaving and the interweaving, the adornment of that space between us. About the recognition of the need to take our time to come into relationship. That's my understanding, don't they? Correct me otherwise. I value the space between, because that's where theatre happens, that's where consciousness happens, that's where I want my work to happen. Between our different areas of activity, this means whono, so that's like a Wānanga maybe, or a hui, but it's a Samoan word that we use, whono, which is all about the space between. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Conscious youth, which is the work we do within the community in Wellington, which is a youth theatre based activity. Advocacy, which is something we draw from all of this experience and then advocate on behalf of. And our national and international touring. We see this thing of conscious not sitting in one area, sitting between these areas. Because we can't be everywhere, and we don't want to be everywhere all the time. Some of our work's taking place in Wellington, some of our work's taking place in Sydney, some of our work's taking place at the moment in Auckland, some of it's taking place in the Solomons. I don't want to control the outcomes of everything we're doing. I want to create an environment where consciousness can be in the centre of those things. So if I'm working with you in Porirua, and I'm working with you in the Solomon Islands, I'm a common theme in your lives maybe, but I want you to also be aware of each other and what the potentiality is there. So consciousness there becomes a field of activity between these different things. Internationally, it becomes the Pacific communities within New Zealand that we're working with. It becomes the agencies, government funding partners, different people that we're working with, communities in the wider Pacific that we're working with, and the international performing arts industry that we're also working with. And by acknowledging that space between, we begin to maximize the potential of getting these things aware of each other. So our work begins to serve as a bridge, as a pathway between things, rather than an isolated entity in itself. Well, that's the idea. Conscious youth is what we're doing at the moment. It's a project we began at the beginning of last year. We're working with schools, 4 schools in Porirua, in the hut, and in central Wellington. We're working with community groups such as the Tokelauan community group out in the hut. We're working with our international work and different platforms, and we're working with our theatre company which we set up in Porirua. So that's got 20 members who've been drawn from these different places, who come together as a company and meet weekly at Pātaka. But again, we want the kids that we're working with here to be aware of the different schools in their region. Schools get very isolated from one another, don't they? I'll talk about that as my summary, I think. Yeah, community groups get very isolated from one another. International work platforms can not seem as though it's part of the same world, but why develop the talent if you're not going to give the talent opportunity? 3 women from our work in the Solomons we cast in a major international work. We actually cast them. We could have cast anybody, but we chose to cast them. We chose to raise the money to bring them from the Solomons and give them the opportunity to voice their story to an audience. Also means it gives them an opportunity to upskill to another level. Then they can take that experience back to the Solomons and feed it back into that women's theatre company. So how many hits can you get off the same thing? We believe in the potentiality of theatre to affect social change, to serve as a vehicle for the positive advancement of Pacific people, in particular harnessing the talent and energy of our youth, building youth self-awareness, instilling confidence, raising its visibility we call conscious. We know that Pacific communities are bursting with potential. The key is igniting that potential and advancing it through relevant, purposeful action, which is into a contemporary context, since those who embody these values have ever been forward-looking towards new horizons. The heightened awareness of that connection to the depth of Pacific culture grants us, we call conscious. So, here's a little shot of our kids at the moment. Conscious Youth Theatre. You can see amongst us Nathaniel Lees, the renowned Samoan actor, Nina, one of our interns, Kasaya, and a whole bunch of young people drawn from 4 different high schools. Yeah. How am I going for time? I got 2 minutes?
About 5 minutes.
About 5 minutes. I'm doing well for
You're
time.
doing great.
I'm doing great. Wānanga whakalihi. How would I conclude? The primary thing I remember, I'll maybe conclude with a story. When we were out in the Solomon Islands, we went there for the first time. You know, a big, nice garden party was thrown by the British High Commissioner for all the leaders within the Solomon Islands community and different diplomats. And everywhere there was a sense of tension and formality, as there always is at these events. And the first thing that Nina stood up and said was, "I'm not here to tell anybody what to do." And there was an audible sigh of relief from the Solomon people. That to me is the beginning of a healthy relationship. You said it as well, I think, Harry, in what you were saying. You know, there are structures which are about participation, which are about the induction of a child into a set of formal ways of being, which they have no choice about. Yeah, where they are told what to do. There are other sets. There are histories that people hold where they have been repeatedly told what to do. Young people, for my money, when I go to work with them, I'm not working, and I worked for 16 years as the head of the movement program at Toi Whakaari. I taught 300 of New Zealand's most talented young people in that time. I didn't do that because I'm interested in telling them what to do. I'm interested in the relationship of listening. That to me is learning, and that is all about the space between us and recognizing the equal authority over that space, which is the most radical idea if you think about it. An equal authority over that space, and the ability to come into relationship and own our difference, but look for what may be created via that two-way pathway in the space between us. I suppose that's what I've got to say. Naka Vakalevu on behalf of Nina and the rest of our company. Ngā mihi mahana kia koutou. Thank you very much for your attention.